Welcome to the Meta Business Podcast. The metaverse and Web3 are bringing about the biggest revolution since the internet itself. With your hosts, Paul the Prophet Dawalibi and Jeff the Juice Cohen, we will be bringing you the latest metaverse business news and insight into what it all means. The Meta Business Podcast starts now.
From the boardroom to the metaverse, this is the Meta Business Podcast. I am Paul the Prophet Dawalibi. I'm joined today by my friend and co-host, Jeff the Juice Cohen. For those of you who are new here, welcome to the official podcast of the metaverse. What we do is we cover the most pressing metaverse topics and news of the week, but we look at all of it through a business and C-suite lens. We dissect, we analyze the business implications of everything happening in this industry. For our regular listeners, thank you guys for tuning in every week. Thank you for the love, the 5-star ratings and reviews. If you haven't yet, do two things. Leave a 5-star rating and review, and go share the podcast with someone else. Send it to someone, email it to someone, text it to someone, share an episode you really love. This is how we've grown. Really appreciate it.
I'm actually homeless at the moment. I'm living at my in-laws for a month prior to.
You're living in the metaverse.
We're living in the metaverse, so this is a virtual metaverse background. But yeah, no, otherwise good. I feel like I'm tired. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a little tired, so I need you to pick me up with some energy.
Well, this is one of those. So moving is probably my most hated thing in life as well. But I will say that this is the great promise of the metaverse should it come to fruition. It may completely nullify, it may destroy the entire moving industry if done correctly, right? If we can really just plug in and live this alternate life in the metaverse, the need to move physical locations, or at least to have lots of physical stuff that you would need to move, sort of gets lessened significantly should capital T, capital M metaverse actually come to fruition.
I look forward to that day.
The moving industry at risk. You heard it here first from the metaverse. All right, we got a lot of news to go through here. We have some good stories this week. I found that I want to make sure we touch on, and let's start with. I thought this was interesting just because it's the first I had heard of it. You'd flagged the story. I had not seen anything like this before. And the headline here is U.S. charges ex-OpenSea exec with NFT insider trading. So the Department of Justice officials say it's the first time they've pursued an insider trading charge involving digital assets. So the story here basically is this guy, Nate Chastain, worked for OpenSea. He quit after, he got in the crosshairs of U.S. authorities, supposedly charged with wire fraud, money laundering. He was trading on confidential information about which NFTs were about to be featured on the OpenSea homepage. Obviously, if an NFT is featured on the homepage, right, going to most likely go up in value. People will bid it up, or will pay a higher and higher price because it's more visible to more people. And I guess he was buying these. But he flipped dozens of NFTs after choosing to feature them on the website, selling them for 2 to 5 times what he initially paid. What do you think of NFT insider trading here, Jeff? Kind of, I wouldn't say fun story, but, one that we don't talk about very often here. What do you make of NFT insider trading and this story specifically?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure, what to make of it.
Does this
first
validate-
case, I guess, of it? It does. I mean, it makes sense. These digital assets have value. So, technically, the question in my mind is, and I don't know if we're specifically the right people to answer this, but are NFTs securities? Like, does the SEC actually have, authority here where they actually can regulate this? Because it's not like stocks or bonds where they're regulated by the SEC. These things aren't, registered as securities. So it's an interesting gray area of the law. I bet there's a lot of people, in Discord communities and other folks who maybe are sleeping a little bit weary or, with one eye open tonight thinking like, hey, did I do something wrong if I've been kind of doing something similar to this? Because there is a lot of, I would say speculation and front running that does happen in these Discord communities. Like it's pretty similar to what we see actually in stock trading, where you have these Reddit groups that, go on and say, hey, I just bought this stock, everyone else should go buy it. And it's a little bit of like a pump and dump. This year is an interesting one. It's definitely not a great look for OpenSea as a platform. Particularly when they're looking to be kind of the leader in trading these NFTs and kind of trading digital assets, in games. So it's a bit of a black eye for them. It'll be interesting to see, where the law actually shakes out here. This could be just, one U.S. attorney looking to make a name for themselves, or they don't actually really have the authority that they might think they do. But yeah, it's an interesting one.
Well, they did fire the guy, so there's that. I think you bring up such a good point about it being a security or not, though, because that got me thinking, like, StockX, right? These websites where people sell like sneakers or like other physical collectibles, right? Like sneakers or, the latest hoodie from Balmain or whatever, right? If I work at StockX and I know this sneaker is going to be featured on the homepage and I buy the sneaker in advance only to then flip it when it's featured on the homepage, do you think there's any universe where U.S. federal, essentially law enforcement here, would get involved because I'm flipping sneakers as an insider on StockX? Do you think the fact that it's an NFT it has put it in the crosshairs a little bit, right? That there's this perception that people might be abusing this and they need to come in and make a statement?
There's actually a little bit of precedence here. I remember back, I feel like it was in 2015 or 16 when DraftKings actually had a bit of a scandal where they had employees that were working at DraftKings that had all the data around usage of players for their daily fantasy site. And they weren't betting on the DraftKings. They weren't using it on the DraftKings site. But what they would do is they would go on the FanDuel site. And because, the usage of players was very similar on FanDuel and DraftKings, they were able to optimize for like the best roster because they knew who was, what players the public was using. And like one guy I remember won something like $300,000, like a massive prize pool on FanDuel, and then didn't think he did anything wrong, like posted about it in a chat group. And it became like a massive thing. And if you recall, that's literally what basically brought down the daily fantasy industry. The New York Attorney General ended up suing and saying it was like insider trading. I don't think that employee ever, he did get fired. I don't think he ever like faced real serious legal repercussions or anything like that. But it actually became a massive scandal for something you wouldn't think. It's like, well, it's daily fantasy. It's not gambling, and it's really just a product for fun. So like there shouldn't be quote unquote insider trading. So it's actually pretty analogous.
One of the attorneys quoted in this article says, this sends a very, very loud message to the industry now that federal regulators have NFT transactions in their crosshairs. He says, we know that there's a lot of insider trading in the industry in NFTs and in decentralized finance. So the question is, are you really disclosing all the information to users or the community? I mean, it'll be interesting to see if this is unraveling something much bigger, right? Where now they come down hard on everything and we start to see, two of these stories a week. Or is this more just like a shot across the bow? We make an example of this one guy and, like shape up industry, basically.
It's a really good question. What do you think? I mean, I went back and forth as you were talking. I think it probably will be a bit of a shot across the bow / you have to set some legal precedent if this is the first time. Like this case will probably have to go through the courts and see, whether it actually gets upheld. And then maybe if it does, the prosecutors start going after others. That's probably what I think. What do you think?
I'm with you on that. And I think that it's the first warning shot. Now, I like to take the side of, call it optimism here, where I think this validates NFTs in some way, right? If there wasn't anything there, if this was all vaporware, if this was, right, that maybe like in some ways, and the fact that they're going after this means this is more real. Now, I don't know if that's a fair statement, but it makes it more real for me at least, right? That they're treating this in the same way they treat if someone was insider trading a stock, validates this as an asset of some sort.
Yeah.
let's talk about Sky Mavis, Jeff. Sky Mavis in the news, and that's always, I think, interesting. Obviously one of the biggest players, if not the biggest, in the play to earn space. And the headline here is Sky Mavis unveils first user-generated games for Axie Infinity. Axie Infinity owned by Sky Mavis. So they unveiled their first projects, the first projects accepted in their Builders program. This is an initiative that introduces UGC, or user-generated content, in the Axie Infinity ecosystem. So it's a laboratory for community-created games, and obviously NFTs at the heart of all of this, right? Like, it's still part of the Axie Infinity ecosystem, so it's all the same mechanics underlying it and blockchain, et cetera. But this is new for them because up until now, Sky Mavis was building their own games, was building their own experiences. Is this a monumental announcement, Jeff? Like, are we going to be talking about this 6 months from now or a year from now still? Or is this like, does this put them in competition with Roblox and therefore much less excited about this?
Well, so if anything, I think it puts them in competition with Roblox, but that actually makes me more excited. The reason why I hesitate to say it's going to be a monumental shift, just because I don't know whether the Sky Mavis team will be able to execute to create something that can actually compete with Roblox. Like, part of me thinks just the community is really there for play to earn. Like, I don't know if you're going to see the type of engagement that we see with Roblox. But it definitely opens up a massive new potential revenue stream in terms of user-generated content. I think we saw a very similar thing with Fortnite, where they're now kind of opening up the Fortnite creative. And I think the story was they were bringing the Unreal editor into Fortnite to kind of beef up the creative mode. So it seems like all these companies that were product companies, were game companies, are now trying to become user-generated platform companies, which I think makes all the sense in the world if you view user-generated content as one of the important pillars of the metaverse, which I actually think I do believe that that's the case. So I think it's a very big potential step. The reason why I'm not ready to call this and say, oh my God, this is a monumental piece of news, is just because I'm a little skeptical that I'll actually be able to execute on it, and that the play-to-earn type community, which, let's be honest, I think there were some stats that over 40% of users of Axie Infinity at its peak were these scholars in the Philippines. Those people were there because it was a digital job, not because they were coming to engage and create content and be part of that ecosystem. So I'm a little skeptical that the Axie community will actually utilize this in the way that maybe the Roblox community has clearly. So that's the only reason why I'm hesitant. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I personally don't think this is going to be a success. I think going up against, like, I believe developers can only develop for so many platforms, right? So to me, there is some element of making the pie bigger, but I also think in some ways it's a zero-sum game. If you're spending all of your time building games for Roblox, you're probably not going to spend time building games for Axie Infinity's platform also. And I think Roblox probably too far along. Like, I don't think there's going to be developers jumping ship. So what is the universe of developers who love this platform, who also have the talent to develop content and can make something really good that people will play? Like, I think you start to get into really, really small numbers. And my fear is, with anything play to earn, the fundamental problem has been making good games. And and opening it up to UGC, in my mind, doesn't solve that, right? That you get smaller budgets even, right? You get individuals who, unless you're a studio with hundreds of millions of dollars, making a great game is really hard. And so while it's not impossible, I see the probability of success very low. It doesn't solve the making great games problem, probably. And the ability to attract developers is low, probably. I just don't see where this succeeds or where it fits. I'm not sure UGC is the answer to play to earn's problem. In the same way, it's very much is the answer to like for Roblox, right? This is the crux of their platform, but mostly because it's monetized through like cosmetics and that kind of content, right? Like that where you have a volume of games and experiences available makes more sense to me. I think you made a great point. The majority of people going into Axie Infinity are there because they want to earn an extra dollar that day. What do they care if there's a cute little mod on something that they've already played? Like, it either helps them make the dollar faster or slower or the same speed, and it'll sort of survive or fail on that sort of point alone in my mind.
Yeah, I guess you brought up a good point. So that's the only KPI that really the players care about, is how much money they can earn. So unless this user-generated content sort of, almost like pseudo app store metaverse increases their ability to earn, it's not going to draw on new players.
Let's talk about investment in metaverses for a moment here, Jeff. This story, again, one you flagged, that really interesting story. The headline here: South Korea to invest $177 million directly in metaverse platforms. So the government of South Korea announced it will start investing in metaverse projects directly. $177 million will be invested to kickstart national jobs and companies in the field. This is from statements made by the Minister of Science and Information and Communication Technologies. As we all know, South Korea, a huge gaming market, right? Huge gaming population, maybe the biggest esports market in the world. And this is a new focus for them. It's included in what they call their Digital New Deal, a set of guidelines that the government's following to push citizens to transition to a fully digital society. Two questions for you here. What do you think of the amount, $177 million? And what do you think of government getting into the business of building metaverses or supporting metaverse companies?
The amount seems low. I mean, for a country, like, I think, we've seen announcements of VC funds that are 5 to 10x this. So I do think, the amount is a little bit paltry, in my opinion. Having said that, South Korea, I believe, their government has always been pretty forward in terms of investing in technology. I believe they've done a lot in terms of infrastructure. Like, one of the reasons why South Korea is so, like, esports are so popular in South Korea, I think, is because they invested a ton in telecommunications back in the 90s, and like they have really good high speed internet and like free Wi-Fi because of all that government investment. So I think, they probably view this program somewhat similarly. So I think it's definitely a smart move. If we view the metaverse potentially at some point as the future of the internet, well, the internet really isn't owned by any company and at this point anymore. Maybe back in the day you needed like AOL and you needed to pay them a monthly subscription, but now it's largely, I guess a service, an infrastructure service, if you will. So maybe it does make sense for the government to own it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about ownership here. First of all, I'm not fussed by the number. I think it's one of those. It's an amount that primes the pump, and I think will attract billions of dollars of future investment and will create a lot of future value. So I love the fact that they're thinking ahead here. I think all major governments should be thinking about this, whether it's the US or Canada or UK or countries in the Middle East. Like, this is the kind of initiative that gets people excited. Most importantly, attracts talent. I don't think we've talked about that, but when you have Facebook/Meta investing $10 billion a year, there is competition for talent, building these metaverses, building the platforms, building the technologies. And so wanting to keep people in South Korea and the brains in South Korea makes a lot of sense from a government perspective. So, I mean, hard to not love this on all fronts. I just wish it was way more widespread and you actually had competition between countries with funds like this, wanting to attract the best and the brightest to build there. This, to me, is the only way the metaverse capital M comes to fruition. And I don't say this alone, because I do think Meta spending $10 billion a year is one of those critical steps that needs to be taken and one of those critical pieces of the puzzle. But I think governments getting behind this, realizing that their citizens will live alternate digital lives and they should have some hand in helping to build and create that, I think is fascinating and great to see. And I applaud South Korea for doing it and prove that metaverse evolves out of gaming. First and foremost, this is why this is coming out of South Korea in my mind.
Agreed on that.
Jeff, super good episode. Wraps up this week's episode. I know it's a bit of a short one, but hopefully everyone enjoyed it. Guys, don't forget, go subscribe to the podcast, leave a like, review, 5-star review, share the podcast with a friend, with a family member, with a colleague. We really appreciate it. Don't forget, the future is fun. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for joining us here on Meta Business. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast everywhere you get your podcasts, leave a 5-star review, and tell your friends, family, and colleagues all about us. Also, make sure to follow Meta TV on all socials to get more of the best metaverse content anywhere. Tune in every week for another episode of Meta Business.